we suddenly stop being rational in space if it's human spaceflight to Mars? Don't we already have quite some hardware technology prepared? So Mars, we believe, is affordable. And yeah, not affordable for me personally, affordable for Europe as a conglomerate, affordable for America, for China. I mean, it's still big money because it would be about a quarter on the tax dollar. If you have, no, it's not a quarter, it's it's not even a cent, it's a quarter cent on the tax dollar that it probably would cost, and then I'm being lenient. So, that's not going to break the bank. Also, saving that is not going to save the economy here. But as a historian, there's something I never understand. We go to Egypt, we gawk at these pyramids. That was a great civilization. Look at what they built. We go to the Great Wall of China, same thing. That was a great civilization. Look what they left for posterity. Yeah, you think that was for free to build that? That wouldn't have meant investment by the federal government there? Of course it did. And it didn't break their bank, I can tell you that. And so, if we want to leave a legacy for posterity, we need to dare to invest a little bit. Because, a quarter of a cent, what is it really? We need to be able to do that and not be dwarfs standing on the shoulders of giants, be giants ourselves. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce Doug McCuistion, who was one of our Mars tsars, and he must have really liked it because he stayed on for 8.5 years. And he also must have been a really sturdy fellow, because either, you are really sturdy and you keep on, because being, having to battle Washington for money or headquarters can't have been easy. And I also think there are two things. If you're a Mars tsar, you must love Mars and know how to get stuff there. And you must also know what it really costs, because it's going to be done under your tutelage. Mars is a tough lady, I said. Yeah, but I think Washington is even tougher, and he apparently battled them. Now that Doug is no longer with NASA, we of Explore Mars have the exceptional luck that he said yes to first being on our board of advisors, and as of now, being on our board of directors, which is, of course, incredible lucky for us, because a mind like that, with an experience like that, is great for our organization. I don't have to explain that. There are never too many smart heads in a room to tackle the task of putting humans on Mars. Doug now and his panel will explain. Harley, am I introducing the wrong panel? On this side, okay. Doug will explain to you one and for all, going to Mars will not break the bank. Right? It won't break the bank? Good.
Well, contrary to popular belief, I'm not going to tell you what the right number is in the affordability equation right now. So sorry about that, if anybody was waiting for that. Good, there's not a big exodus from the room. Okay. So it's very much a pleasure to have been invited to be part of the board of directors of this group. They do great work. I've been involved with Explore Mars for a number of years as the last program director of Mars. Hopefully there will be another one. But the last program director, and they did great work, and were actually very, very helpful in some of the campaigns regarding Curiosity and that highly successful global event that we pulled off. It was one of the greatest things for this nation I've seen in a long time. But affordability varies dramatically from folklore to fact. The numbers are equally variable, folklore in the trillions and folklore in the several hundred millions. So I think that the work that Explore Mars has done with the affordability workshop, and you're going to hear about those results today, as well as some others' opinions, have really, really helped cut away some of the folklore and help bring this down to dispelling some of those myths. I also like to think that Curiosity has helped this a lot. While it was expensive and we were slightly over budget, what we've done is, frankly, push the technologies forward and prove that we can do things such as a 1-ton system on the surface of Mars, which you can bring cargo, you can bring many things to the surface with that kind of capability. Nuclear power on the surface. We're really not going to, if you look at the size of the solar farms around the United States trying to power towns and cities, we're not going to be able to do adequate human systems on the surface with things other than RTG type of power. And then the other, of course, is habitability and resource availability on the surface. And MSL Curiosity continues to amaze us with the things it discovers, from that initial flowing riverbed that we landed in to some of the formations that we're seeing now that we actually don't quite understand, which just makes it clearer and clearer why you have to explore. But I really believe that affordability is less the issue than it is national priority, national will, and strong, solid, determined, visionary leadership. Those are really the three things we need, and I think affordability is, if you want to know the truth, a secondary element of this equation. If you get those three, I think what you'll get is you'll get the excitement, you'll get the momentum, and certainly from the Explore Mars survey of a year or so ago, we have the national interest at the citizen level, well proven, over 70% supported. So if you add the other three elements to it, you not only get momentum, but you get great legislation, and you'll hear about all of these things from the panelists that we currently have. So we're going to start with Dr. Harley Thronson. He's a senior scientist for advanced concepts in astrophysics at Goddard Space Flight Center. His current responsibility is leading the team that assesses designs for future large astrophysics missions. He's decided to pull his head out of the cosmos just a little bit and help us look into what can be done to afford Mars more effectively, and was a key player in the Affording Mars workshop itself. I'm going to introduce all these folks first before we go any further, just to make it a little easier. Seated to Harley's left is Jeff Bingham. Jeff Bingham, like me, is a recent retiree after 8 years as the senior Republican staffer for the Space Committee on the on the Senate side of Congress. They're the group that has authorization authority for NASA in the Commerce Committee. He spent a number of years, over a decade actually, with NASA. He was in the Office of Legislative Affairs at headquarters. He was a legislative liaison for Space Station. He managed the Space Station War Room for quite a number of years and was the associate administrator for a couple of years as well in legislative affairs. Worked at Johnson before that, Johnson Space Center, and spent time with the synthesis group in Space Exploration Initiative architectures. So it's a pleasure to have Jeff with us. Rebecca Spike Keiser. She is currently the Associate Deputy Administrator for Strategy and Policy downtown at headquarters here. So that's only going to last a few more days as she's moving over, still a NASA employee, but moving over to American University. She's going to be assistant to the administrator of the university for innovation and public-private partnership. So she didn't have enough of a challenge with strategic planning at headquarters. She has to go do public-private partnership planning with AU. Very exciting stuff, though, and it's a pleasure to have her here. She also actually has been with NASA for quite a number of years, starting back in 1999 in international affairs, and was an Asia desk lead, I believe. So. And a new addition to the panel wasn't listed in your book is Laura Bailey, and it's a pleasure to have her here. She's from Johnson Space Center. So what we have three folks that are going to talk to you about the whys and the whats, and Laura can actually talk about the hows, because she's a project manager at Johnson right now for the Exploration Augmentation Module. It's kind of the what happens between space station and a human habitation, humans at Mars. Previously, she was the project manager of a deep space habitat project for AES, and project manager for Space Shuttle EVA tiles, and her expertise is in EVA loads and dynamics. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Harley and take it away.
Great. Good. Thank you so much. Thanks, Doug. Oh, there we go. I'm going to be describing in the next 10, 11 minutes or so the recommendations, the findings that grew out of what we dubbed the Affording Mars workshop, to which a number of folks have been referring this past week. I want to note emphasize, let's see, I have a better my own laser, but I'm going to emphasize that what I'll be presenting will be selected recommendations, a full presentation, which I recommend you reading the original documents or the full documents. A full presentation is typically about an hour, and so what a few of us did is pull out some of the selected recommendations that may be most relevant to you all here. I think probably 10 or so of the participants at the workshop, or here today, were at the workshop as well. So if you press me on some of the selections that I made, I can probably point to a handful of folks who are here to bail me out, and then I'll see if the magic twinger works. Oh, what do you know? Okay, great. We followed what we refer to as the Galveston paradigm. Some of the same planning team members who produced the workshop that I'm going to be describing here, in this last December, it was held here, had about 2 years previously held a workshop in Galveston, Texas, to look at what are plausible and assess what are plausible space habitation systems in the 2020s. Not specific designs, not technologies, not capabilities, but instead, how do you make it happen? How can you make it more affordable? What are the minimum capabilities, not specific capabilities? How do you make it more affordable, usable to a large number of folks, and so on? In other words, policy, programmatics, and strategy. And that is very much the same theme that we adopted for this Affording Mars workshop. It was, we intended to be representative, GW back in December, about 60 participants, nice group photo there. It was organized around plenary discussions, 3 breakout sessions, and as I was just noting, the emphasis was not digging into and comparing, contrasting specific technologies and designs, although they were discussed there. It was policies, practices, management schemes, advocacy, and so on. There are follow-on activities, which I may have time to mention, including a second workshop. You can find the formal reports on the Explore Mars website. Why Affording Mars? And Doug referred to this. Many commentators, you've heard them, I hope you haven't been them, have heard them refer to trillion-dollar Mars missions, including as recently as yesterday, a highly visible op-ed in the Washington Post that quoted hundreds of billions of dollars for Mars mission. International space policy, many folks believe, the second bullet there, has shied away from a serious, really serious commitment to Mars exploration, perhaps in part because of fear of such an enormous amount of money. However, last bullet there, multiple independent studies inside and outside the government, within the US and overseas, indicate, work is still underway, indicate that at least initial human missions to Mars should be substantially less expensive if certain principles are followed than hundreds of billions of dollars. The workshop organizers, as the italicized blue state there, the workshop organizers felt that this issue of unaffordability, enormous cost, ought to be addressed head on. Okay, so this is the only part that you really have to remember. I'm going to be talking about the recommendations, of course, and the findings and the next steps and so on. This is the gist of the gist. This is where you can, when you get to the bottom, the last bullet, you can rest up and you can go back to your email. The 60 folks that were brought together believe that initial human missions to Mars are affordable, but only if key principles are followed and followed rigorously and carefully. First bullet. And the second bullet is probably an enormous challenge to the community of folks that want to develop these human missions to Mars. Human spaceflight activity is not directly in support of or directly supporting human exploration of Mars, may be costly distractions. Now, say a few words about that. That took quite a bit of discussion. Everybody in that room had a favored activity for humans and robots, of course, and humans and technology development. And, we want this EVA and that type of fission, that type of fusion propulsion, and we want these kinds of capabilities on the surface of the moon, on the surface of Mars. No, we're going to go to Phobos. We could not afford, the world GDP could not afford what was discussed in a 3-day workshop up to a point, until folks recognized and committed themselves to there has to be a no. There are going to be some things. If you want to affordably go to Mars, in about 2 decades, there are some things between now and then that you cannot do and you should not do. Now, there was some debate at the workshop as to what they were, but what they were was put off for another meeting. We kicked that can downstream, but the folks did agree that very difficult discussion, which any community would find difficult to have, has to be had. Let's see, third bullet. There are a lot of decisions: technology, investment strategy, priorities, scenarios, and so on, how you are going to organize the community inside and outside the government, inside and outside the USA. There are some decisions that have to be made in the next very few years. We've heard that throughout this workshop. Time is passing, you may have noticed on your watch, day per day. Just, that was one of the observations of the workshop. The fourth one there, no big surprise, this architecture must be build to available budget, which is something that the human spaceflight community, I come from the space astronomy. I was the first program scientist for JWST, which has had some budget issues. Building to available budget is extremely difficult. That has to be adopted by the human spaceflight community, and that is extraordinarily difficult. Second from the bottom, that sounds like a cliche. Deep community involvement is essential. Deep community involvement has not taken place. The human spaceflight folks is about as insular, a highly educated group as I have had any experience with, and I'll get back to that in a bit. Science participation at the meeting, the scientists actually getting in and debating this issue, that management scheme, and so on, turned out to be extremely useful. The engineers, the human spaceflight advocates found the scientists to be very adept and useful at assisting in not just developing the science goals, but developing ideas about how you achieve human spaceflight goals. And this last bullet is probably no surprise to any of you. LEO to Mars, which is a shorthand version of going from space station to being fully ready to go to Mars, is not feasible. There has to be some kind of transition. Okay, there are a bunch of workshop follow-on activities that have been carried out pushing this idea forward. Don't have the time to go into them. We can talk about them later. Breakout session topics at the meeting. Read these for a moment. I'll go on quickly. Note down here, what I'm now going to show you are about 5 slides of direct quotes, verbatim quotes. So that allows me to say, well, hey guys, these are direct quotes from 59 other people. You go beat up on them. However, it's my emphasis, it will be put in red, which I thought would be useful to you all. So I'm responsible for the red, but all the words are direct quotes. Okay, major principles of agreement. Notice identifying and solving key technical gaps over the next several years, where several might be like 5. You got about 5-6 years to solve some big problems. Now again, there is like 20 years before you fly to Mars, but you will be building that vehicle in 2025 or something like that. So you got to solve some technical problems in the next several years. Warning there. And here's a point that got us into a lot of discussion and will be very, very, very difficult for this community. It's very difficult for my astronomy community colleagues, which deal with much smaller missions, of course. If you have a proliferation of goals for human spaceflight, you're going to have an enormous expansion of the cost. There's this famous quote that I happen to like, lots of other, supposedly attributed to Napoleon. If your intention is to take Vienna, then take Vienna. If your intention is to go to Mars, then go to Mars. Now, of course, how and when, so it's important. But if that's your intention, do it. Artemis, feel free to use that quote. Okay, major principle of agreement, no surprise up there. We loved the space station. And these are not all space station folks that were at this meeting. This was really important. Mainly human spaceflight folks at this meeting loved the robotic program, not only for its own scientific importance, but because of, which we've heard throughout this meeting, the important role as precursor, developing capabilities and as test sites on the Martian surface and in the Martian atmosphere. Here's a little note. I'm a scientist, and the team felt that the scientists made valuable contributions, not setting up science goals, but in that process of debating and discussing this. I like to always point this out. The folks who rebuilt London after the Great Fire of 1666 had it right. They engaged 2 astronomers to lead the rebuilding of London. Major principles of agreement, and this should not surprise anybody, so I'm going to go quickly through this. Budget, available funding and all is important, but consistency, constancy, policy budget stability is critical. Can't plan 20 years if you have annual wild mood swings on the political leadership. Okay, some selected recommendations. Again, this shouldn't surprise you for many of you anyway, but those of you who attended and paid attention during this workshop, is that the session, one of the breakout sessions, concluded that because the space station, a critical first step in going to Mars, will not fully test out all the systems and subsystems in preparation for going to Mars, some kind of transition facility for the 2020s, we've heard a fair bit about that, was necessary. Probably the one new thing is that the folks thought that it should be the ISS program that does the management and the direction of that. Again, with international partners, they got lots of experience in that, and with academia and aerospace companies. It should be managed out of the space station. Affordability and sustainability. There was an interesting discussion about what affordability meant. And affordability there's another, I'll say it more succinctly than the quote that was produced by the group there, is that it's what folks are going to be willing to pay for. And that there's some mythology in human spaceflight, also science, that if you have a great idea, the money will flow automatically. If you build it, they will come. It's not that world. It isn't that world. We got so much money, we can make the best case possible. There is a possibility, always is, of getting a modest increase, but you can't count on it. Affordability means what somebody's going to pay for it, and sustainable, in many cases in architecture designed for human spaceflight, sustainable is an engineering and a technical term. How to keep folks alive, how to get them there. In this case, it's a political term. Sustainable is what folks will continue to pay for. And that's what this workshop emphasized, and that's what the community needs to emphasize. We will build, or as a community, we will build that which the political leaders will pay for. Let's see. It strongly recommend a widely vetted, involve the community, compelling plan for the initial human mission to Mars with regular series of achievements. And down here I emphasize deviation from this. Once it's set out, deviation will lead to delays from which it will be difficult to recover. A lot of this is mom and apple pie. I don't care much for apple pie. I love my mom. But it isn't clear that this has been internalized by a lot of our colleagues. Let's see. Principles for human exploration of Mars. I guess I got about a minute left, something like that. This was really felt to be very important. Establish near-term milestones. That will drive a lot of your decision-making, allow you to focus your budget on what is necessary, and demonstrate to our stakeholders, the political leadership, the public, that you can achieve it. It will tend to drive you toward success. Near-term, unambiguous milestones. And then here is example milestones. The Affordability Mars workshop did not all agree on it. That wasn't the purpose of it, but example milestones. And here we go again, this last bullet, a transitional deep space facility in the early 2020s. Laura, our wrap-up speaker, will be talking a little bit about, of course, those things. That idea has been around since Arthur C. Clarke in the 1960s. Notional sequence of missions. Here was some examples of level 0 requirements that they came out. One of the possible workshop follow-ups is a community development of level 0 requirements. And the summary recommendations, I already went through that with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Harley. Jeff, ready?
Oh, do you need it?
Thank you. Great to be here and be a part of this very exciting week of activity. It's been going very, very well. This is the question I had when I saw the topic, what is affordable? And it's a very subjective thing. I don't think, I had a hard time trying to figure out how to define it compared to what? Some things have more value than others, and so what's the whole mix look like, and in what context? What are you trying to accomplish? Who are you making this judgment? Are you a politician? Are you a congressman, a senator, or a homemaker, or someone else who has a whole different set of values to have to weigh and identify priorities among, and over what period of time? Some things are long-term expensive, some things are short-term, and that's going to come into play as people talk about affordability, quote unquote. And then for something like an exploration initiative, what's the level of consensus? And that's been talked about a little bit about how important it is to have the broad-based participation at the public level, and then a broad consensus on the private level. I'm not sure you can read that, but it's just, and it's a little out of context of the flow of what I want to say, but it's just a cartoon I came across that I thought was amusing. It came after Augustine, and it's as if he's appearing before for Congress and the Congress saying, look, what I gather is that if we simply restore $3 billion back to NASA, that'll cure all of NASA's problems. And he says, yes, you can assume that. And so let's see, $700 billion to Wall Street that got us nothing. Almost $800 billion in stimulus that so far got us nothing. Yet for a crummy little $3 billion per year, NASA can give us the moon, Mars, asteroids, inspiration, and countless material and technological benefits that Americans will be using for the next 70 years. Sounds about right. Yeah. Now, some of that's a little controversial. I want to say that I subscribe to all the points in that. But taking a quick look back at historical experience with major programs like this, we of course had Apollo. Apollo was deemed affordable at the time because it was a matter of being the price of leadership in a very competitive geopolitical world. JFK, when he spoke in Congress in the joint session in May of '61 and announced the Mars objective, was very careful to point out the cost. He made no bones about how expensive this was going to be and how difficult it was going to be, and he challenged the Congress to bear that in mind, recognize it, and make the commitment, make the long-term commitment to it. And so, as a result, we moved forward. NASA had a great budget during the '60s. People always talk about the golden years of budgeting for NASA, and yeah, we did have 4% of the federal budget, but the federal budget was a lot smaller then too. Apollo, I think someone did an estimate, it cost about $125 billion in today's dollars to do. At that time, it was sold as an $8 billion program. In fact, Jim Webb was the then administrator of NASA, was going up to Congress to justify the budget, and he was told that the figure to use was $8 billion, so he doubled it. And but in the end, it succeeded, but it was challenged. The very next year, the Congress debated the advisability of it. It never was a full, easy road, even with Apollo. And then, of course, it ended early because as a result of cost and other priorities. Another context came along, the Vietnam War, the Great Society, a whole new array of programs came along, and it just didn't have the priority. And so Apollo was ended. The shuttle became the next big program, and it was a matter of a choice that Nixon made between the shuttle and station. Actually, the task force that Spiro Agnew put together recommended doing both of those in parallel. And as a matter of cost and affordability, Nixon chose to go with the shuttle because it promised the reusability, the idea of having a reusable capability. And it established the idea and the value of having a system of transportation that could then be used for a variety of things. Most of the missions, if not all, I think Hubble was the only shuttle mission that had any sense of organized thought at the time the shuttle was developed. So we did 135 other missions that were developed based on what that capability provided. And I think that's an important point that needs to be remembered as we look forward into the future, and it, in fact, was a guiding principle for what we did in the 2010 Authorization Act that I'll get back to in a minute. Station was seen then as the next logical step after the shuttle was first launched in '81. They started talking about it, and finally in '84, as you recall, President Reagan made it part of his State of the Union that we would build a space station within the decade. He used sort of the Kennedy-esque approach, and but the idea was it was the next logical step, a foothold in space that would allow us to go beyond low Earth orbit. It was controversial from the beginning, and it went through a series of design issues and cost estimates all through the late 80s and into the 90s, and culminating with severe reconsideration with the Clinton administration coming in, and the station had been going through once again another redesign or a budget reallocation. And so another redesign was called for in '93. Right as that was finishing up, the redesign report was just finishing up, the Congress was taking up the issue of appropriations and authorization for the station. And an amendment was offered to defeat it, just to kill it altogether. And it passed by one vote in the House. Now, technically speaking, that vote was really 5 votes because it was in the Committee of the Whole, and the delegates voted, and had they not, it would have been a 5-vote margin. Still, that's very close in a 435 member body. I believe the Senate would have sustained it and put it back in, even had the House killed it, frankly, based on history and where things stood. But it was a wake-up call. It forced NASA to think in terms of how do we justify this station, and so that began a process, that lasted for almost really until '98 was the last time we had a real major vote on space station. But we had 24 different votes in the Congress to try to kill it, and it's a whole other story. In fact, I'm supposed to be writing a book about it, but about the whole war room and how we went from a 1-vote margin to 4-to-1 margins by 1999, which and those are some lessons that I think may want to bear in mind as we again move forward into exploration. So once the station was, of course, the next logical step. Beyond LEO is where we want to be going next, and we've had a history of kind of evaluating ways to do that. We go back to the Payne Commission, which was established by President Reagan, but required by the Congress in '84. They did their work in '85. Unfortunately, the report went to the printers on about January 26, 1986. And if you recall what happened on that date. And so they hurried and put in a frontispiece in the report document that was a memorial to Challenger. And so it was published by Bingham Books in May of that year, and basically has been on bookshelves, and I don't think ever was seen again as a policy document, which is very unfortunate because it was a 40, 50-year look ahead, had everything you'd ever want to do in space at every level of exploration. Excuse me. But was a victim of unfortunate timing. Space Exploration Initiative, 1989, I was there at the Smithsonian. President George Herbert Walker Bush said we're going to go back to the moon and on to Mars, and established the Space Exploration Initiative. The synthesis group was set up. It was mentioned I had the good fortune, I think it was a good fortune to be a part of that. It was a 9-month drinking out of a fire hose of looking at everything that you can imagine about how you would do exploration. I mean, we had Bechtel Construction Company in showing us how they were going to mine regolith, and on the surface of the moon. It was incredible. Produced a document. You can see on the left there. That was supposed to be the next new word on exploration. Unfortunately, there was some competing program priorities going on. Again, going back to the space station in this time period. Remember, it was a little bit controversial internally in terms of having a conflict, and the synthesis group did not include the station as a feature of its architecture because they didn't really want, frankly, didn't want to get burdened by that albatross of what was then considered to be a liability, the station. But NASA wanted to promote station, and in the end, somewhere in that mix, somebody produced a budget estimate of what any one of these four architectures in the SCI or in the synthesis group would have cost, and it was about a $500 billion cost. This was the first time we had sort of a multi-billion-dollar myth. This was a myth. The synthesis group never did a cost estimate. We didn't do an estimate of cost because it was a series of options. It's very much like the Augustine Commission later. And so when that surfaced, it was dead on arrival. I put it in quotes because that's what my predecessor, actually, in the position I had on the Committee of Commerce, subsequently said, based on that price, is dead on arrival. And so we never went forward with that. The next time we had an opportunity to discuss exploration in the broad scheme was the Vision for Space Exploration in 2004, when President Bush came to NASA headquarters. As you recall, this was in response to the Columbia accident, and which had happened the year before, and one of the recommendations and the findings of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board was that NASA was drifting, had needed to focus and needed purpose, and that was a contributing factor to the accident. So they needed a new goal. And so the VSE, Vision for Space Exploration, was in fact seen as the answer to that requirement. From the standpoint of the Congress, and as a matter of law, and some will disagree with this, we are still, but I'm from Congress and I helped write those laws, so you understand where I'm coming from. We're still in that VSE arena because the NASA Authorization Act of 2005 was written primarily to be a response to the Vision for Space Exploration announcement of 2004. And it was specifically addressed as a means of showing congressional support, bipartisan, bicameral support for the main elements of the Vision for Exploration. That we do in fact endorse and support those broad goals and objectives, and you know, that was very clearly laid out in the 2005 Act. The 2008 Act went a step further and reinforced that, again on a bipartisan basis. All these bills passed unanimously in the Senate and with large majorities, if not unanimously, in the House. So there was a consensus. In the 2010 Act, is a little bit different because we had the transition after the 2008 election of a new administration. And the question was, what are they going to do? And the Obama administration's first budget submission basically said, put an asterisk in the budget. The budget document had an asterisk for exploration funding, and it said, we'll submit a new budget number pending the result of a evaluation we're going to have done by a Human Spaceflight Advisory Committee, which became the Augustine Committee, the second Augustine Committee, headed by Norm Augustine. And so since that point in time, NASA has been back in kind of a limbo again. And there's been uncertainty about what the future would be because it wasn't clear what was going to happen with Constellation at that point, again, which had been endorsed and supported by the Congress as well. And the Congress was paying attention to the Augustine Committee as well. We were watching what was being considered and what the options were and what the report was, as the cartoon reflected. But we didn't have any answer. We didn't get a new budget. And instead, after the Augustine report was released, we were told that the response by the administration would come with the next budget the following year. And so the following year, early 2010, the 2011 budget came out and basically killed Constellation, terminated the end of Constellation. And so the 2010 Act was a direct response to that, with the Congress saying, wait, we're not going to stop, we're not going to support the Constellation rocket development, but we're not going to step away from the long-term objective. The long-term objective is going to be Mars. And we reinforced that issue, but established instead a capability-driven approach. We're going to build a vehicle that will help us do almost any mission along the way to get us to Mars. And what I've been impressed this week, especially, has been what I see as an emerging consensus on this general idea that's reflected in this cartoon. And I think, the bottom line is, and I'll quickly wrap up, is that there is no cost estimate, so there is nothing to debate. There's nothing the whole idea of $1 trillion is mythology, because we don't have an architecture, we don't have an end-to-end vision. So, but experience suggests, as we look back on what at least I experienced in these previous activities, is that we need to be very careful about defining an architecture with an associated dollar figure that could be, well, the death knell of the program. We have to go about it very smartly and intelligently. And the challenge is to make the debate about the value of exploration as a fundamental process of humanity. Acknowledge that humans to Mars is the overarching objective and could be shown to be an achievable goal in a reasonable time frame. And I think we need to keep the contributing steps as elements of the broader objective, make them meaningful to the broadest possible constituency, and the greater the accepted value, the less relevant the debate about affordability will be. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Rebecca?
Thank you, Jeff. There's so much that Jeff said that so resonates with me, and I have to tell you that I view the Payne Commission report as one of the best future-looking policy documents that there is, and I look at it all the time and read it all the time. One of the reasons why is because in the Payne Commission document, it talks about the main tenets of why we pursue space exploration and why we pursue human space exploration. And those tenets have not changed through time. They're based on benefit. In my view, we've had 4 whys of space exploration that have existed through time. They exist in the National Space and Aeronautics Act of 1958, as amended by Authorization Acts through time. And they're reiterated in the Payne Commission report. And those 4 main whys are, the first is U.S. preeminence and the role that space has in U.S. preeminence. That the way we have pursued that has changed through time. During the Apollo era, of course, we were in a Cold War environment, and preeminence was through pursuing a program that was better than the Russians. That changed, of course, during détente to preeminence through collaboration with the Russians and through our other international partners through the space station. But it has existed through time. The second one is human survivability and human expansion into the solar system to emphasize survivability and pursue survivability. And that's a principle that was re-emphasized in the 2010 Authorization Act as a main goal of human spaceflight. It's expansion of humans into the solar system. And we all agree on that as a general principle. The third reason why NASA exists and why we pursue space is expansion of knowledge and understanding of the universe and of Earth. And those interact with each other all the time. As we understand the universe more, we understand the Earth more, and vice versa. And the fourth is that benefit, that economic and technological benefit that improves our lives back here on Earth, and the role that space has in that. The challenge is, these 4 whys have always existed, how we pursue them, right? And the emphasis, which one has more emphasis at particular times, has changed. So I think we're in an environment right now where we have an economy that is kind of recovering, still not great. And so I think we have an environment where people are looking to NASA for more of that benefit. NASA, what have you done for me lately? And in that kind of environment, it's very hard to then have a really good meaty why for a long-term exploration program. How can you justify spending a lot of money to explore the universe when we have so many problems here on Earth? And I think that's why, as Jeff said, what is affordability? It's the cost benefit. And what we have to do is not only explain better what the benefit is of space exploration, but we have to design our programs from the beginning to really emphasize that benefit. We can't just convince people that it exists just because. We can't just design something without that in mind and then just hope it happens. We have to consider that kind of thing from the beginning. And how do you do that? Well, from the beginning, you have to design a program that includes partnership as a mindset from the beginning. What kinds of international partnerships are we going to include in a program? What are they going to contribute, and what are we all going to gain through that? What kind of commercial partnerships? What kind of innovations do we really hope to gain out of this program? And so let's think of the kinds of technologies that we want to include right from the beginning in this. I say all of this because we've done a lot of research through time at NASA, as much as we can, on public interest in space. And does anyone have a guess of the group currently that has the least interest in NASA and in space?
NASA employees.
NASA employees.
Oh, wait.
Harley.
Headquarters.
Yes, it's mothers of young children. They, as a demographic group, have the least amount of support for NASA right now. In the past 5 years, it's been pretty consistent. And why? Because they're mothers of young children, and they're thinking again about that direct benefit, right? We want our government to invest in health, in education, in the things that are going to benefit us. We all know that space exploration has that in it. It's a longer-term benefit, right? We see health benefits as technologies develop through time. But again, if we design our programs to enhance that benefit from the beginning, I think that we can enhance the support. It's also why I'm really looking forward to the NRC report on human spaceflight coming out, because again, and Jeff had a big hand in helping make sure that this happened. The point of this study is to talk about the value of human spaceflight. What is the value proposition? And what really resonates? And so we're expecting that report to actually have a number of different value propositions and evaluate them. And I believe that this is going to help NASA, because again, as we design our program, if we're truly going to be strategic in how we design a human exploration program, and we're going to make it be affordable because it's going to be the benefit that's going to justify the cost, it has to be based on that good value proposition. So good, let that come out. I think it's coming out at the end of May. I hope that does spur an even bigger national dialogue, and I hope we really take that to heart, again, in making sure as we produce the tangible steps that are going to get us to Mars, we make sure that we emphasize that value proposition that's in that report. Thank you.
So Laura, tell us about the exploration module a little bit.
Oh, here's the clicker. Great, thanks. So this has been a really interesting topic, because when I saw the topic in the agenda, I thought, I wonder what they're going to be saying about this. I'm really excited to hear what they are going to be saying about this. And here I am part of the they now. So this is a little bit about where we're going with all of this and how we can hopefully look towards providing an affordable means of going from our asteroid redirect mission, actually starting with the space station, going to asteroid redirect mission, utilizing the asteroid, and working in that proving ground that is in the lunar vicinity and going beyond that. So this is sort of the gist of the gist chart, like Harley was talking about earlier. There are two basic problem statements that are involved here that need to be communicated and addressed. The first being, how do we show extensibility, that extensibility from the space station to the proving ground in the lunar vicinity that we've been talking about going to Mars? And then second is, we actually need a Mars architecture that we can feasibly say is within reach, or one that we can be extensible to. So as part of that, we need to be addressing then the critical path, the strategic knowledge gaps that we've been talking about, hearing about for the last 2 days, and advance and test out the new Mars vehicle capabilities that we've also been talking about the last 2 days. And that is what we would be doing in the extensibility discussion as part of the proving ground area. And we also need to, as part of the discussion in terms of the Mars architecture being something we can be extensible to, we need to reduce the scope or think about reducing the scope of our initial mission or missions to promote this sort of gradual growth that begins with our first missions in the 2030s. So what do we need to be doing in the proving ground location in lunar orbit? As I mentioned, there's the strategic knowledge gap closure, and this is all something that's sort of a fundamental or critical vehicle and set of crew evaluations that need to be conducted actually beyond the Van Allen belts, purposefully there. Although there are some that can be closed and worked on at ISS, there are specifically ones that also need to be addressed beyond the Van Allen belts in the lunar vicinity. And we've been talking about that a great deal. I've heard various presentations about this, so I won't go into detail, but you've been hearing things about crew performance and health, microbial population dissimilarities, even food nutritive degeneration, food microbial controls, those sort of things all need to be addressed specifically outside the Van Allen belts. So the whole idea here is that these sort of evaluations, though, should be conducted sort of in this close or at least lunar proximity first before going to a remote case, going all the way out somewhere, waving and hoping everything goes well. Because we have a sort of a safe place, if you will, it's a few days away, in the event that we have a redesign or repair situation or crew issue that's sort of a close proximity, and we can address it right away. And these all get tested out in that proving ground. So as another part of what do we need to be doing in the proving ground is this whole idea of testing out our capabilities, our exploration capabilities. So in this sense, we would introduce and test out these exploration class capabilities in sort of this Pathfinder transit vehicle in the cislunar vicinity that contains and or is augmented with those capabilities. So sort of stepping through this, you would start out by using essentially discrete missions to that location to grow up the vehicle capabilities, and actually start growing the crew duration of stay. So maybe the crew goes up and stays for 3 months first, and then eventually 6 months, and then 9 months, and then 12 months. And this is just a notional projection of that. We're trying to get formulated what the actual sort of steady cadence would be like, but this is sort of a notional idea of how we would do that. And that the idea would be you would expect to vet those, that exploration class set of capabilities and the crew's capabilities within that, working within that environment in a location that offers all the benefits of being close to home, but has the same environmental challenges of being in the remote case. So the idea here is that in doing these series of evaluations, you would or could make changes to the vehicle or the vehicle capabilities, or you could add and remove spares. You could be changing out the tools or equipment that you had estimated that you need, or even adding and removing crew accommodations based on what is deemed wise to do so, based on crew comments. Because at some point, you know, as we're growing up these capabilities and making changes to what we've added and removing some sort of capabilities or replacing them with newer ones, the crew will, in their extended periods of time of staying, have comments and responses back like, you know, geez, you've given us 11 of these spares and we've only ever used 2 of these things, but we sure could have used an extra can opener. So we would take those sort of things into account and make adjustments to those things. And so the fourth line item here being that you would expect to implement the actual changes that seemed appropriate and build your actual Mars transit habitat in a manner that actually takes those results into account. Because one of the focuses of what the Mars transit vehicle needs to be is as lightweight as possible. We want to push as little mass out and back as we possibly can. So the number of spares, the logistics, the things that we take up, each and every one is a value. And we care about what we're placing in that vehicle and how many we don't have as well, equally. So this Pathfinder would not necessarily be intended to be used as the actual Mars vehicle that's going outbound, since its primary purpose would be to serve as the proving ground area. This is the Pathfinder vehicle, as well as the strategic knowledge gap closer for deep space transit. And we would be working this all in cooperation with the international partners and with industry. But we could continue to use this vehicle to support international partner objectives, such as a staging location to go to the lunar surface, if that's deemed appropriate, or any other commercial interest or international partner or scientific community involvement or purposes there. So I don't want to read through all of these, but there's a gist that I do want you to get from this chart. So in the far left column here, this is a list of some fundamental or basic capabilities that are provided for a certain mission type. The far left column being for a vehicle that is in LEO, in this case, our example being from ISS. This next column over is vehicle capabilities for a cislunar mission, such as the asteroid redirect utilization mission, which is lunar vicinity and short duration. And then on the far right is a list of capabilities for a vehicle that is a long duration remote class vehicle. That is, the reference mission being used here is actually the NASA Design Reference Architecture 5, DRA-5, that folks are probably familiar with. So this is not a comprehensive list of all the vehicle capabilities that are provided by each of these. However, I did want to draw your attention to probably the color. How about that? But I will go through a few of these just as examples. So in the far left column, for a vehicle that's in LEO, we have docking capability, we have airlock capability, we have ECLIS, life support systems, we have crew quarters and food and provisions and EVA capability, all those sort of things, robotics, those sort of functions. Now for the lunar mission, for the asteroid redirect mission, we can reuse all of those same capabilities that are in black. They're essentially things that we know and that we can reuse for that mission scenario. So where we're carrying over the things that are in black are things that we know about and that we can use in that particular mission set of objectives. So what's new here, though, is what's in blue are new capabilities for the cislunar mission for asteroid redirect. And that's what we'd be bringing to the table. AR&D, which is automated rendezvous and docking. We'd be improving some of our radiation capability for the equipment because it's outside the Van Allen belt, so it's a little bit different from what's on space station. And then lastly, we are going to be introducing an advanced EVA capability in that set of missions as well. So what's new, or the new capabilities that you're going to be bringing to the table, are what's in blue right there. So on the far right, for the DRA-5, there are several new capabilities that are needed. And those are highlighted in red, actually. So there's some carryover, some things that we can use that we know, because there's things that we know and there's things that we don't know, right? There's SKGs. And there's new capabilities that need to be brought to the table. So things that we know about, we can reuse our standard docking capability, and we know how to make airlocks, and we know how to do attitude control and station keeping, those sort of things. But there's a whole set of other new things that are going to either be different or changed or evolved or completely different and not even introduced into either one of these two scenarios by nature of the mission. Some being, in this case, nuclear thermal propulsion is part of DRA-5, the long-term use of cryos and storage, in that case, in situ resource utilization, crew mitigation for long-duration exposure to GCR. So these are things. In addition, I want to also make mention of automated logistics management and automated caution and warning. So these are situational setups where the vehicle actually itself is... Oh, yes. We're running out of time. Okay, sure. So this is a situation where we're actually having the vehicle monitor itself and potentially even repair itself. So as a notional example then, the deep space habitat, a deep space habitat study of a lean, fast Mars, or a one-year round trip, was making the effort to suggest how can we significantly reduce this capability needs gap between the air emission and the long duration remote case, and how can we significantly reduce the weight, power, and volume, How can we significantly reduce the long pole technology gaps? And in some way, how can we reduce the overall costs for the mission to Mars in terms of infrastructure and the new technology development needs? So again, there's this capability gap between where we're going from cislunar and jumping to our remote case. And the idea here being that you insert a mission that is much more reduced in scope, that reduces us down to a smaller subset of these red items that you would be introducing into your vehicle. And that would sort of give you this sort of more gradual growth towards the DRA-5. So, in summary, there are the two basic parts of the approach is you have sort of the growth of the capability changes that need to take place in the vehicle that would be evaluated in the proving ground, and so you'd be growing up and then also closing your strategic knowledge gaps at the proving ground. But on the other side, you would be also hoping to reduce your mission scope for your very first mission or first sets of missions to Mars, so you can sort of grow or make sure your railroad tracks sort of come together in the middle. And that gives us a little bit more of a gradual progression towards where we need to be with Mars, and it allows us a longer period of time to grow those long pole technology items over time and spread out the needs and costs for those. So thanks.